What's up guys, this is Chris here, and today we're going to be bringing you another video about some kind of garbage handguns. I've done a lot of positive top fives, and a lot of people always request the guns to avoid. So we've been doing that a little bit more, and we're going to continue that today. I have a very popular video, the top 5 best shooting handguns, and because of that video, many people ask me, what are the worst shooting handguns? And I don't know why you crazy people would want to know this other than just to avoid it. Maybe you want to torture yourself. Either way, here we are. Out of all of the handguns I have ever shot in my life, I have picked the 5 that I believe is the hardest to be accurate with. And I've got a little bit of experience in this. I shoot handguns for a living, and I shoot many different handguns for a living as well, being a gun reviewer. So I have a lot of experience with many different brands, types, calibers, guns designed for a very specific purpose like concealed carry or competition. So today we're going to take out the guns that I think are going to be the hardest for everyone to shoot, whether that be, you know, shitty barrel, trigger, sights. All of these are probably going to be a combination of those. But before we get in this video, I do want to mention my patron supporters. Thank you guys very much. I bought most, if not all, these guns with the patron dollars. It's the best way to support the channel. If you like the free content, just please go down and click the link and subscribe to my Patreon. Also, I want to mention a local shelter named Iowa. It's the YSS. It could really use your help. I'd really like to support those kids, so please go down to that link and donate to those kids. And then finally, we have a link to Outlaw Life and merch and all that other good stuff. Check it out. Let's get right into it with number 5 here, the SCCY. Now, that's gonna be a little bit of a controversial pick because this is a very popular gun. But in its genre, in its peer group, I would argue that it's the hardest pistol to shoot. It's a very cheap gun, but it's certainly not the cheapest gun available. The SCCY CPX-2 is a double action only polymer frame 9mm pistol with a 3-inch barrel, a 10+1 capacity, and an overall weight of only 15 ounces, making it a very small, a very lightweight gun. And the smaller and lighter weight gun you generally get with the heavier trigger, the harder the gun is to shoot. And this gun is no exception. Not only do you get a budget-oriented pistol with budget ergonomics and budget parts, with a budget trigger, you get a very small gun on top of that, and all that leads to a very unshootable gun overall. The long, heavy double action trigger pull of this particular 9mm with the cheap sights and the cheap barrel make for a gun that I would argue is almost impossible to shoot past 25 yards, at least this particular version here. I shoot long distance pistol all the time just as a fun pursuit. I consider myself relatively good at it, and with this gun I can hit it almost no distance. I think we got pretty good when we got to about the 10-yard mark. But you have to understand, this is coming from a guy who routinely shoots at 100 yards with most of the handguns that I review. Not just because it's practical, but just because it's fun, and I like to see the accuracy potential of it. A lot of people think that 10 yards is the only distance you'll ever actually have to shoot in a confrontation, but I like to have the accuracy to deliver a shot at any distance I would be required, or at, let's say, a close range target that's very small, like a hostage target or something like that. I don't believe this gun is even capable of serious accuracy, and because of that, it has made it on this list. That being said, it is far and away the best shooting gun on this list. The gun does come in for around $250 to $300, so keep that in mind. You can get a red dot version of it for $400, but I would recommend shooting yourself in the foot before you do that. In at number 4, my old nemesis, one of my least favorite guns of all time. It has topped several of my worst guns list, and for good reason, because it's a pretty terrible gun. But, spoiler alert, it's also really inaccurate. This is the Taurus PT-22. Now this is modeled sort of after like the Beretta Tomcat series, and as I've mentioned plenty of times before, the reason why I purchased it is because of this. It pops the barrel out. That's actually how you load it. You load one round into the chamber and you shut the barrel if it will allow you to. We'll get to that. And then you load in the magazine, and theoretically you have a semi-automatic pistol that's easy to load for new shooters or people with arthritic hands. Problem with that is the gun that's easy to load with arthritic hands also has a literal 1-inch barrel and a 12 to 15 pound double action trigger pull, which makes this difficult to shoot. The trigger in the interface with the sights is generally the failure point of guns when it comes to accuracy, and this is no different. It has an absolutely abysmal trigger with absolutely rudimentary abysmal sights. As far as like an actual gun, which we'll get to here in a minute, like a gun modeled after common pistols, this is very, very difficult difficult to shoot. And again, it's because of the very small ergonomics. This gun, again, has a 1-inch barrel. It has an overall weight of only 11 ounces. So keep that in mind. It also comes in at a price around $250, and it is an 8+1 22 long rifle with a double action only design and a safety. So not only is this gun very unreliable and very hard to load and actually shoot, but it's very inaccurate as well due to the cheap components, cheap sights, and cheap trigger. Oh, it's also discontinued because even Taurus knows it sucks. In at number 3, I'm going to talk about the North American Arms 22 long rifle Derringer, but I did sort of want to speak on pretty much every Derringer, because every Derringer from 22 long rifle up to 45 ACP, if you have a 45 ACP Derringer for concealed carry, you must be a fun guy to party with, because that is a crazy ass gun. But the Derringers themselves are a very old design that were meant to be a belly gun in the Old West, and they're made with modern parts, so a lot of them are very reliable. That being said, they're almost impossible to shoot. I did a trick shot challenge with one, and I have shot Nick's plenty of times. I haven't had mine myself, Nick from PewView, but when I was shooting that gun, I realized it's literally impossible to shoot. It's so small that you can barely hold it in your hand. That's the point. It's supposed to be a very deep concealed gun. But because of that, the accuracy past 5 yards is almost non-existent. I mean, the concept of, not being able to hit a broadside of a barn is actually pretty accurate with this gun. If you were 50 yards away, I wouldn't be shocked if you missed an actual barn. The barrel itself, I believe, is a 1 to 2 inch barrel, depending on what you get. I think the one we had was a 1.13 inch barrel. The gun only weighs 4 ounces. 4 ounces, that's not 4 pounds, 4 ounces. So it's impossible to keep in your hand even when you shoot it. And that's one of the issues with a gun as well, is once you get a gun that light, that small with a large caliber, like 22 Magnum or 9mm or 45 ACP, which they do make those, by the way, you have a gun that people like flinch before they even shoot it. You should see people in slow-mo shoot that gun. They're like, ah, right when they shoot it. And it just makes it impossible to actually focus on the fundamentals, because you don't have enough trigger, and the trigger is very heavy, and you don't have enough even space to keep the gun stable in your hands while you're trying to shoot. Stability and repetition is the friend of precision, and the enemy is time and size. Like if you have a small handgun, no matter how good your fundamentals are, your accuracy is going to degrade. And when you get the smallest handgun, your accuracy is going to degrade to almost nothing. They're cool guns. They work for belly guns if you're going to press it into the target and actually shoot. But other than that, if you have any distance at all, I would certainly not recommend these. And at number 2 is going to be another weird James Bond-esque gun, and that is going to be the Braverman Stinger Pen Gun. The Pen Gun is a pretty cool gun, and it's straight out of James Bond, Jason Bourne, whatever spy film you want to get, but it does not do its actual objective all that well. It hides as a pen super great, but if it turns into a gun, it's pretty hard to shoot. I actually got a chance to shoot it for a first shots video from Cal from Optics Planet. He's a really good guy, and he owns one of these. They're unbelievably expensive, by the way. We just looked him up, and there's one for sale for $3,200. I would recommend steering as far away from that as possible. That's ridiculous, especially for a gun which can't be shot past 10 yards. I think, what was the record? 25 yards? And he said that was the farthest anybody's ever shot it. That just happens to be me, by the way. I think Nick shot it that far as well. But you're talking about several dozen tries to get a single shot on a target 25 yards away at my own range. I mean, we were really persistent trying to get a hit on that target. If you had to hit an unknown target that might be moving or under stress, first of all, you're never going to get the gun loaded. You're never going to get it in action. But if you did have all those things, you're still very, very likely to miss, partly because it still has the same ergonomics and trigger of a freaking pen. Like, it's really hard to shoot. I can't stress enough. It's a cool gun, and I do recommend owning one if you get the opportunity. That being said, as far as pure accuracy standpoint, the Braverman Pen Gun is absolutely abysmal to shoot if you're actually trying to hit something. I mean, if you're trying to hit a 6-inch plate at 10 yards, you're better off throwing it at it. And you would get more hit percentage if you threw the pen at it. All right, now before we get to number 1, I did want to mention one honorable mention. Now, it's actually easier to shoot than these 5 guns for sure, so it didn't make the list. That's kind of how top 5 lists work. But the 22 long rifle credit card gun, I was able to get consistent hits with after a lot of practice, but I do want to recommend that as another gun that's kind of James Bond-ish. That's incredibly hard to shoot, but it is a lot easier to shoot than the pen gun. That being said, let's get into number 1 here, a gun I shot last week, and I literally couldn't believe how bad it was. Arguably the worst gun I've ever had on the channel. This is the Altor. This is a single shot 9mm pistol that has a breech action, and the trigger itself is also the takedown lever. So we're gonna take it open here, and what you do is you slide around down on the actual breech face itself there with the exposed firing pin, and then you lock the gun back up, and your trigger mechanism is not pulling the gun all the way to the, pulling the trigger all the way to the rear, but it's actually pulling it all the way to the rear and then releasing it like something you get out of one of those machines you put quarters in. A lot of people said it looked like a butane lighter. I super agree with that. It absolutely does. And if you wouldn't know any better, that's probably what you would think it is, because it doesn't look like any other gun I've ever seen. It doesn't operate like any other gun I've ever seen. And it shoots like it as well. I mean, it is absolutely impossible to get good hits with this because of the trigger mechanism. And also, look at those sights, boy. Those are nubs. Those are little plastic cheap nubs that aren't even zeroed, that you can't sight in and you can't do anything with. And oh, by the way, this spot right here, that's not a part of the grip like people were saying. They were like, choke up on the grip. You can't choke up on the grip, because when you shoot the gun, you're actually supposed to keep your hands down here, because you have to keep everything out of the way of the trigger mechanism so your finger can come back and slide off that when you're done. That's actually how I figured out how to shoot the gun. As you can see here, you got to go till the end and you just let your finger fall off. And from that distance, or from 10 yards, I was able to get consistent shots, but anything past that was absolutely impossible. What a shit show that is. Not to mention the recoil on this gun is ridiculous, because it only weighs 10 ounces and it is a single shot 9mm with no recoil spring, no hammer spring, nothing to save you. Oh. Hit though. I flinched like a bitch there. So it's got a lot of recoil, it's hard to shoot, it's hard to load, it's relatively unsafe, and overall, I would consider it to be the hardest pistol to shoot that I've ever fired. A lot of these are forgiven because they are lower calibers and you can get a little more practice time on it, but I can promise you, if you buy this gun, I don't think you'd shoot more than 10 or 15 rounds in every range session. And not to mention, is this an unbelievably weird battery of arms that takes a lot of getting used to. It has so much recoil, you're never gonna get used to it. So I would avoid this gun above all others, but that being said, all of them have a nice little place in my heart just because they're cool and weird, and some guns don't have to work well to be kind of cool. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. Please help out your local homeless shelters, and remember to recycle. Check you later. And as far as a tractor traffic jam, say that 3 times fast.
Band name.